Hi, and welcome back to Meta Square. I'm Nate Barsetti, Virtual Event Production Lead here at Meta. Thank you for joining us for the Carmack Q&A. John is joined by a group of developers from our Launchpad, Start, and Growth programs. So let's go join the conversation.
All right. So, hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. And while we've already had some chat going on before, I am at your disposal for as long as you have questions now, or until my headset battery dies. So.
Thanks so much for joining us, John.
Hello.
Yeah, all right. I don't know how we're going to go around here. Who's moderating or starting?
I think I was starting.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'll kick it off. My name is AJ. I run Odin Softworks. We're one of the Launchpad participants. Current project that we're working on now is kind of the intersection of a game like Skyrim with, the Dungeons and Dragons mechanics really realized in VR, but also done as a co-op multiplayer. So my question for you is, what is the thing or concept you see as the most significant blocker to growth in VR in general? And what is something a developer at my scale can do to mitigate that?
So I really don't think there are any showstoppers for VR success at scale now. I think we have enough examples and existence proofs of things going out and getting really good mainstream acceptance, where things like Beat Saber and Supernatural, where you just drop those on somebody's head and it pretty much works. I think people trip themselves up when they go for much more sophisticated interaction dynamics. And like if you're doing an RPG game, figuring out exactly how you map all of those things to VR controls could be a real stumbling block for people adopting it. And the general advice is, there's lots of stuff when you get people that are already hooked. You can add all sorts of layers of depth and all the different things that your users demand for extra sophistication, but you have to hook them first. And I think that's still what too many people in VR kind of miss, is that fact that you need to kind of gather up as many people that might have any conceivable interest in what you're doing and kind of gently pull them into the game, kind of coddling them through a lot of it before really taking the hardcore VR mechanics. Because people that are VR enthusiasts will talk about all the different things about their favorite ways to do locomotion or inventory control or whatever. And those are just not going to be the things that determine whether somebody will come back to your game in the first 10 or 15 minutes. So there's so much that's not really VR specific that I keep telling people that all the things that are important to make a good or successful product in anything, those are all still the most important things in VR. What you've got to do in VR is just not trip over your own feet or, shoot yourself in your own foot with some VR specific mechanic. Try to just do something that would be a great game any other place that then gets extra depth and richness from VR, rather than saying it's all about the VR aspect.
Yeah.
I can dig it.
I've actually got a related question.
Yeah.
So I'm Jim Taberge from Hidden Realms. I'm basically a indie game studio building a loot and shoot dungeon crawler entitled Dungeon of Necros for the MetaQuest 2. It's basically a cross between the games Gauntlet and Gorn, and it's heavily influenced by work that you did in your earlier days at id Software on titles like Doom, as well as games from my youth like Ultima Underworld and Diablo. So my question is, as a game developer, I've always been intensely curious about the qualities of games that make them sticky. For example, what game design elements drive replayability, and how to leverage player psychology in game design to drive players to return to a game over and over. Given your experience with building such player-sticky titles like Doom, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on those topics, as well as what unexplored areas in game design you feel may be opportunities to drive stickiness. Thanks.
So there is a pretty deep body of research on kind of the psychological stuff about compulsion loops and so on. And I'm really not deeply read in a lot of those areas where I know, especially when you get into sort of the gambling oriented games where you get people that are pretty objectively pursuing some of those areas. And I was always much more about the tactical game feel of things. My contribution on the design side was always just making the actions that you do intrinsically fun, where there are a lot of games where sometimes you're like, damn it, I'm just going to gut my way through this because I want to get to the end. You know, you're giving them an attractive carrot, and that works for some people, but that's never been my method. You know, I was always about, I want the game to just be so much fun as you're doing it that you don't even care that much that you're getting to the end. I mean, it's always nice to give you an extra cookie at the end of something, but you don't want it to have to have been a struggle to get to it. Now, that is some people's cup of tea. I mean, some people want the incredible grim experience of getting to the end, so you feel that enormous accomplishment. But I'm much more about, like, you want to be sliding through all of this, just having a blast, you know, whipping around, feeling like every rewarding action, every shotgun blast timed perfectly, the railgun sniping somebody out as they're tracing a geometric trajectory across the air, just these intrinsically fulfilling things. But there are a ton of aspects to that where when you talk about something in the abstract, like a gun firing in a game, that's almost nothing. What matters then is you break it all down to, I tell people to look at frames. You know, anytime you're doing a game, record a high frame rate video capture of everything. And don't just say, well, I play an animation, I have a muzzle flash, I start a sound effect. You want to look through every single frame and say, all right, the user triggered this here. I immediately do something to tell them that I have acknowledged their behavior. Something else happens with a sharp snap of acceleration, and then it comes back on, the sound rolls in, smoke comes off, and you can literally write out a dozen things that you do to give feedback for it. And it's like a chef making something where you have all of these seasonings, and you have to go ahead and figure out exactly the right amount to have each thing in. And that, I remember when I was doing this back in the Quake 3 Arena days, when I just wrote out this list of here's all the different things that I'm going to do for feedback, and then here's how the weapon matrix is out. And some people go and make spreadsheets of all of these things. You know, the designers that are really picking it all out. Here's like every item or every weapon that I'm going to have. Here are all the different axes that I can give feedback on. Make sure that anything that you can think of doing for a programmatic thing, find as many places to use it as possible. But you can overdo it. You can just dump too much of one thing in. You need to make sure that you can hear the notes of all the different elements that you're mixing in. So that's been my path. It was always about the game feel of the moment-to-moment side of things. But there are clearly valuable things that other types of game designers do that, you know, with arc and progression and raising tension and kind of directorial and storytelling things that happen across it. But I do think that if you go out and you look at the world of gaming, the things that have been the most important types of things that the Fortnites and Minecrafts and Dooms and whatnots, the Call of Duty multiplayers, that a lot of these wind up being things that people just enjoy playing for the sake of playing, that it's just so much fun to play that you're not necessarily being led around on, by some bait that you're working to try to achieve. You just do it because it's awesome, and some people just do it for thousands of hours in some cases.
Yeah, I think the journey itself, you know, getting through the game, everything that you mentioned, is definitely can be the bait as well. You know, it doesn't have to be the end goal. It can be the enjoyability.
Yeah, and sometimes like you get that with item progressions where, you know, your reward for getting here is you get this awesome, cool new item that is so much fun to use that you're just kind of your reward is not a specific thing, but your reward is getting to play more with some new toy.
I like your analogy, too, of being a chef, because that's how I feel when I'm making things, too. And I take the same approach in terms of just, you know, going through, adding in every element that I think gives the player a bit of feedback here and there about what they just did and how, you know, maybe it affected the NPCs that were in the frame at the time. And then thinking about what's missing and how do I make it better and more, just fuller for the player. So.
Right? Yeah.
I have a question. It's kind of on a different direction, but so my name's Veronica Graham, and I run a small game studio called Most Ancient. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather, so bear with me. Yeah, so we're making an interactive experience. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure mindscape that you move through. But one thing that I feel like as developers of small teams working on VR is, where is the funding for these projects? I mean, we don't really know who the audience is going to be because they keep on wanting to expand it and get new people in. But when you don't have a guaranteed audience, it's really hard to know if your investment of time is going to pay back to you. So who's like publishing these things? Who do you think is going to be supporting these kind of projects as the platforms sort of develop?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about sort of direct user interaction platforms is that, you don't need a publisher like in the old days to go ahead and get access to customers. So most of the successful early VR titles were small developers that were able to go do something that they thought would be interesting in VR on a small enough scale that they could sort of test the waters. There are places that there are grants to do development in some places. Oculus or Meta has support for some cases, but people that look at a traditional game development project and it's like, well, where can I go raise $10 million to build my VR game? That's not really around. It has to be done on a smaller scale. You have to kind of pick your battles, where for some non-gaming things, you'll find organizations that want to be involved in, get some of the metaverse juice in some way, and they've heard it's big. They want to get involved. I know there are a lot of small teams that do some work that kind of keep the lights on by doing contract work for other organizations. And the hope is that you keep the lights on long enough, you work on your custom, your passion project in the space between it. That is a hard way to live, though. And in a lot of cases, I wouldn't say there's great odds of success in something like that. So starting off from scratch to be making some kind of game, it really has to be finding a small market that you can absolutely serve. One of my advice that I give to everybody is, don't think about abstract markets. You got to think about really personal markets, where think about actual people, like who is going to be buying this game? What is actually going to be the factor that makes it valuable to them? And can you distill it down then into something that takes less and less total effort to be able to build? It's never easy to be spinning up a small game studio on any platform is a very, very hard road. And there is no kind of royal road to success that's going to get through that. But if you've got something that has that is really great, that you've got a dozen people that think something is really fun, and like that sense of playing a feel where if you've got something that you can onboard somebody to the experience, and in a minute they're doing something, they're like, hey, this is kind of cool. You can see the smile under the headset as they're enjoying themselves. That's a path that you can then start trying to leverage. Go to some of the people that are funding the projects, and the people that are running these projects, they are used to seeing an incredible slush pile of really, really mediocre stuff in a lot of ways. And so if you can rise above that by having something that's it's better to be very, very self-contained and concise and just have some little hint of magic in it than to have some really rough mess that's large scale and open. And if you want to impress people that do have some purse strings, that would be my argument, as to, your scope's not going to be anything because you don't have the resources or budget to do that. But if there's a kernel of an idea, it's got to be simple and clear enough that they can pick up on it in seconds. If they've spent a minute just looking around trying to do something, you've probably already lost them. That ultimate distillation of everything down is really what you've got to concentrate on. But yeah, it's still hard.
Can I ask a follow-on question to that?
Yeah.
So my name is Immersive Matthew, and I'm I guess I'm an Imagineer, as you were saying earlier. I see myself more as an Imagineer than a developer, and I'm making a dark ride about the metaverse, the story of the metaverse, how we got to this point and where it's going. So my question is, this hearing you talk is really resonating with me because I'm not a game developer. So when you talk about game loops, which I understand that dopamine hit you need to get from the player, none of that is relevant to me except for that dopamine part. And I find that really interesting what you're saying about focusing on the emotional reaction, I guess, is what you were trying to say there, is focusing on that emotional reaction. I guess the question I would have is the follow-on is, how do you measure their emotional reaction? Because for me right now, I don't get a lot of data, but I imagine that as soon as eye tracking becomes a feature, we're going to be able to get very clear data on what is the emotional status of our guests. So my question is, where do you see the kind of data channel for developers like us or creators like us in the near future, so we can get that kind of data, so we can then craft those experiences to get, those emotions that you're just talking about, that you're trying to do back with
right
Doom.
now, what developers have to do is you have to literally watch people play your game. And it's amazing how many people will spend a year building a game and they'll give it to people, but they won't watch the people play it. And it's some of the saddest things for me to see people that have poured their heart and soul into something and put 2,000 hours of development into something, but they built something that's just not good, and they're not aware of it because they haven't watched other people interact with it. They've got visions in their mind and they paper over everything. But watching people and watching their faces, seeing when somebody, you've got something in a game when somebody clicks the button, does that, and they just get that smile, whether it's, a grim smile of accomplishment there or just the smile of glee that they just saw something amazing. If they're just playing your game and afterwards they're like, yeah, it was okay, it's that was kind of fun. If you never got a rise out of them, then your game doesn't have the real magical spark that's going to take it to broad levels. Now, in the future, this idea of using the eye and face tracking to collect that kind of joy at scale, I actually don't know where we are with that. We have a bunch of issues with privacy about how much of the tracking data is going to be available. Clearly, we have to make that possible to skin an avatar, that you have to be able to get that. So if you're rendering avatars and you've got that information, you should be able to pull that out. But that seems like something that should be generally valuable, of kind of a happiness sentiment that we're extracting from eye and face data, which we totally should be able to do. I'm not aware of what the status of internal research on that is, but it sounds like something that would be a good idea for us to have. But we've got the issue again where these, on Quest Pro is going to be a niche product compared to Quest 2 in the mainstream. And it's also going to be a different demographic where it's aimed at professionals, and you're going to get probably a more reserved set of people than the teenager that's got the Quest 2 that's going to be more effusive, positive or negative about it. And yeah, you'll also get the negative ones where people are just pissed off and disgusted with what's happening, and catching those on your game may even be more important than the moments of joy. So I'm probably going to follow up with somebody internally about that, because it seems like that would be quite valuable, because I know large fractions of the second tier and lower game developers just do not pay enough attention to how people are really responding to their games. It can go out and you can say, hey, 1,000 people played my game. Only this many of them came back, but it's going to be very hard to extrapolate from that to exactly what parts of it were the joy or anger inducing aspects of it. And we may be able to get something from that. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, I can follow up on that too. So first of all, my name is Eric, and I work for Squiddo. We're a development studio. We're in the growth track as well. We've made a world here in Horizons, and we're also working on an adventure game that has a physics-based locomotion system called No More Rainbows. And so just to follow up on that conversation that you were having, I do agree, because for example, we had a beta for a game that had 200,000 downloads, but then recently we did a playtest with just a very, very small pool of people. And then just by looking at their reactions, we could see, okay, this is working. Or if they had a frustration, they were like, oh, no, this is not working, or I can't press these buttons, or this is not working. So actually, seeing people play VR is an entirely different thing than just having a feedback forum and getting their feedback
That's true.
on what they're feeling. Because oftentimes people can't really put their emotions on paper, and they can't they'll say like, oh, this was cool, this is my favorite part, this was like the worst part, but like if they're having frustrations, they're not going to be able to pinpoint it. You will be, though, as a developer, so actually seeing the people play really helps with that.
Now, spinning off of that a little bit, it is, I tell people, you definitely want to pay attention to everything that everybody says online. They're expressing something, but you have to filter it in a lot of ways where they're probably not going to be telling you exactly what you need to know, but you should still listen, because even if it's just, somebody being outraged and insensitive about something, it's still information and they're still expressing something. And 100%. If you get to the point where you're just like, oh, I don't read the comments, that's not a great place to be, or, in the reviews. Like, I've had that problem where even internally, I mean, like, why aren't we looking at the reviews of some of our first party applications that are getting hammered for a lot of stuff? And people are like, well, that might be a little depressing sometimes to go read through all of that, but that's what should be driving a lot of your decisions. And, you can't let yourself be crushed by a few negative things, because no matter how good you are, there's going to be people that hate what you do. Just that's the reality of it. But if you set your expectations reasonably and you can kind of take an anti-fragile approach there, where don't get destroyed by the negatives, but take value and even joy from the positive things that are in there. And if you're at a point where your product isn't getting any of the positive stuff, you've probably made the wrong product. You need to be able to have some kernel to kind of grow off of. And I tell people to like follow the gradient of user value, where you've got to find something. If you've just landed at a random point in design space, it's like, oh, this is all terrible. But as soon as you find somebody that had some positive reaction, there's a signal there, and you can start kind of tacking your design over into that direction. And if you really rigorously follow that, and sometimes people will have conflicting desires, but average it all together and kind of gradient ascent towards success. And people like to think that design is about this, like leaning back, blue sky, looking at an empty whiteboard and sketching out a genius design. But it's so much more about like getting something out there and then iteratively improving. And it's amazing how much benefit comes from purely local changes, not making version 2.0 that's completely different, but just fix everything that sucks and then find, all the things that are good, replicate that and spread it out.
Yeah. It's a good one.
Okay. So, I wanted to follow up on the topic you mentioned, conflicting designs. My name's Shinami Michaels. I was in the Horizon growth track. I built a world called Hanami, which is a cherry blossom viewing world where you can go cherry blossom viewing in Japan anywhere at any time. It's sort of my love letter to that experience. And there's also a dragon because it's VR. And I wanted to, I've been wanting to ask about how, sorry, I wrote down the question so I wouldn't get too long-winded, how Horizon Worlds will balance the need to support new users who come on and create some of the most interesting experiences I've had, because they're coming in with really strong emotional stories that aren't games, but they're strong narrative experiences. And Horizon Worlds makes it so accessible for them to do that and just jump into spatial 3D creation, with also allowing 3D meshes to come in, which seems to indicate that it will raise the skill level needed to be a creator, and also what people's expectations will be for the experience. So how do you continue to support those new
there's real issues there. And like some of the things, one of the brilliant, amazing thing about Minecraft is that the whole world is so crude. It just sets it sets a maximum level. And like, I saw this going through the whole history of the video games that I was involved with, where a lot of people would look back and say that the original Quake 1 was the golden age of game modding because everything was crude. You had limits. Nobody could do something ultra amazing. And so there was all this amazing creative stuff because people would try out new game modes, make crazy items and do things like that. But then every generation after that, the graphics got more sophisticated, everything got better and more polished, and it got harder and harder for people to make game mods that kind of seemed relevant next to the commercial offerings, until in the later years, the people that were still doing game modding in first-person shooters, they were basically professional development teams that were still just just operating in the amateur space. And seeing, especially Minecraft, but also now Roblox, the fact that having quality upper limits has some surprising benefits on the creative side of things. And the fact that these are such enormously successful titles shows that it can still be possible to have very, very large scale success without this pushing the limits on AAA quality. But like I was saying earlier, we're still fighting this issue where in my Twitter feed after my talk, I had somebody going, what is this PS2 graphics stuff, talking about how Horizon and the avatars looked there. So you have this strong tension. It's like, oh no, we have to make the graphics look better. And you're right that professional triangle modeling will look much better. You can make the new Lord of the Rings environment in home looks amazing, and Horizon could just import that and you could have a world that looks like that, which is a very different style than what we've got here. And I don't have an answer for this. I'm not really on the Horizon team. I think that they have a huge challenge in a lot of ways with what they're trying to do, because they're trying to be everything for everyone. You want it to be a place for everyone, but not all design directions are reconcilable. In some ways, you have to kind of pick a style. So I do keep saying I've had criticisms of a lot of aspects of Horizon, but I like our current avatars. I'm trying to tell people, it's like, don't rush for the next revolution of all of these things. Take what we've got and just nail down the quality on all this dynamically for everything. And so from creators, you'll always be able to create new things anywhere, but that problem of how will the community receive it is a real issue. I don't know what what to do about that, but I hope that it can be made so easy to get into that you don't talk to the Horizon community, the Horizon gaming community in some way. You're just talking to anybody that got a new VR headset that doesn't have the preconceived notions of what's going to be in there. And then we need to make it just super easy to get into these as bite-sized experiences, because the process of getting into Horizon and finding something, is a challenge. And there's people talk about the funnel, where getting a user to even be aware that you exist is step one, and then getting them to actually get into the application, load your experience, then actually try to experience it. So there's a lot more that I think we can do on the platform level, so that the behavior we'd like it to have is be like a website. There is no web design guide that everybody follows. There's everything in the world, everything under the sun exists on the web, and there are some retro sites that are still done by hand in Notepad, and then there's things that are built in, all the latest frameworks and construction sets for things. So hopefully the experiences in VR can be like that. Whether Horizon as a single application can cover all of that, or if we get other things in WebXR experiences that become easier for people to do. There's some things there, but they have a lot more serious kind of polish and professionalism challenges on mobile than they do on PC. So I'm sorry, a lot of these questions I don't have perfect answers that give you necessarily actionable stuff here, because these are the real messy world of trying to build, especially entertainment applications, where if we're talking strictly technical stuff, I can be like, okay, you do this with your vertexes, this with your shaders, and we just get it done, and this is objectively better. But the design questions are hard, because it's a whole world of different tastes, and we have specific limitations and things that we have to deal with here. But I do think I still hold out pretty good hope that VR can have this, the simple first-time user just create something where you get a little bit of that poetic beauty, where it might not have a lot in it, but there's just something with the composition there that gives you a little moment of peace or appreciation for something. And I think that we need some faster way to get through that, because there's a lot of stuff that could give these beautiful moments, but if it takes you multiple minutes to get to them, nobody finds them. And I was really disappointed that this happened even with 360 photos, because that's one of the things that should be sort of the easiest user-generated content. And there are a lot of really beautiful, compelling, amazing photos. And we don't even have an app for viewing that anymore, because we never got a lot of support on the 360 Photos app. There are literally millions of wonderful images. And my take was that it was on us to find some way to make this immediately gratifyingly responsive, that we know we have all this data from things like all the feeds on all the social apps. It's about if things load a quarter second faster, that materially affects millions of users. And we never got that level of focus in VR, where I did some demos of bringing technology into it. Like to load a 360 photo as an 8K by 4K JPEG image. You load that in, it just takes multiple seconds to load, multiple seconds to decode, and then, a half second to upload before you finally render something. And there are paths around that. Like I did a demo of using the video encoding technology. Instead of like encoding a video, I made a separate a separate iframe for every image. And I had all these giant images that I could decode in 15 milliseconds a piece. And it was amazing. I had this huge view and I had a controller, and as fast as I could tap the buttons, it could like show these brand new full frame, views for everything. And I try to get things like that into our mainstream applications, but these are twitchy, low level, technically optimized things where the teams, they want to be able to just say, let's grab the library that's used in the Facebook app and pull things over here. I've done this with photos and videos, and they don't stay on live in the main line. I need to get more buy-in from developers, but I think that's the path. I think that we could imagine apps, whether it's things like static environments, static models, WebXR experiences, or Horizon Worlds, which would be probably the hardest of them to do that. But if you could get to the point where you see something interesting, I want Explore when you land in VR to be like a feed. There's interesting stuff there, and you want to just be able to tap on it. And we can kind of do that with video, 360 videos now. It's only a few seconds to start a 360 video. But if we could get more of the experiences like that, we can be kind of close with the Quillustrations, some of those cool animations, and there's some interesting work that people do as creators with those. But it's so much harder to do with a big WebXR experience, or even worse, a Horizon World, because so much infrastructure needs to be loaded in. I've got ideas and plans of attacks for how we could make it 10 times faster, but they're not near-term things. Yeah. Oh, are you muted there?
You're muted.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, I still can't hear you. Uh-oh.
No.
I saw the mute go off and on there. Uh-oh. Well, you go on to somebody else here. And if we hear you, if you get your audio working, we'll come back to it. All right, in the corner there.
Yeah, I talked to you briefly at Connect 6 in 2019 and asked you a bit about
an old timer. Welcome back.
of processor development. I wanted to follow up now that it's 2022. Do you think that the state of mobile processors will ever approach what we see now in PC, more powerful processors? Given that we're
I actually think it literally will never hit the level of like your modern, even previous generation VR. Previous generation high-end GPU, CPU. Apple especially has done some amazing work with getting a lot of performance out of a relatively low amount of power. But we know where we are with all the different nodes, and we're going to continue to get faster. But we're not going to get 50 times faster. We're going to wind up getting, it's like, okay, for 30% more each generation, that compounds up a lot. That winds up being real performance when you're 4 or 5 generations down the road. So like when I first brought up Gear VR on mobile, I was using a Samsung Galaxy S6. It had a 2-core processor at the time. And, now we're running on an 8-core processor at a much higher frequency with, more stuff going on. But it's still probably not a full order of magnitude more performant than that. And that was 8 to 9 years ago at this point. In the next decade, we might get another order of magnitude of performance, but it's going to be tailing off by then. And I think probably not. We wind up being power and thermal limited, and we're seeing that at the very highest end where the latest cutting edge nodes on GPUs, where now they're getting a lot of the performance just by pushing more power into it. Seeing a GPU taking 700 watts now,
Crazy.
where we're doing a little bit of that on Quest Pro. We're pumping more power into it to get more stuff out of it. We didn't get really better silicon at that point. We just got a better cooling system on it. We can turn more power into heat without causing a problem with the headset. So, no, we're still riding a track of improvement, but it is probably never going to get to the point where people are on the PC today. It's just mobiles. It's always possible we get some amazing breakthrough. I'd be the happiest person in the world if something comes along and we just dramatically improve all of our CPU stuff. But it looks like we're slowly tailing down. Every win is very hard fought. We're going to get more. The next XR2 G2 sort of in development, CPU faster, GPU faster, dedicated VR hardware. But it's not going to be magic. And that's why I keep telling people you got to care about performance now. There was a period kind of in the 90s, you're making game devs and you could make something to be like, oh, this is not really fast enough, but you just slip your schedule a little bit. The new processors come out, get adopted really fast, and and you're kind of saved by that. And that's not really happening so much.
Man, I was counting on that.
Yeah, you get your 30% performance boost, not your it's twice as fast as as what it was. There is some hope that dedicated custom hardware winds up. You can still potentially get an order of magnitude improvement by specializing things very carefully, but it's not as easy as most people think, where so much of the work that we might want to do, even in computer vision type things, it's still lots of multiply adds, and the GPUs are pretty good at doing the multiply adds. You get a factor of 2 by going to systolic arrays for things instead of things that are sort of independently thread scheduled. But unless you start going to lower precisions on things, where that's possible in VR, like all the stuff that we're doing here, everything here is rendered in shaders with floating point, probably 16-bit floating point if they know what they were doing. But all of this really could be done back with NVIDIA register combiners in the late 90s with like 10 or 12-bit fixed precision. No programming through it. So we could get more pixels per second out of a given watt by removing some of the features that we love, but it's going to be trade-offs. It's not going to be free. If anything, I kind of think graphics almost jumped to floating point calculation sooner than they needed to. It made it nice and easy to program things, but a lot of performance was given up for that, and we could choose to claw some of that back today if we wanted to, but I've got no signs that any of the major vendors are actually going in that direction.
Can I ask a question about the hardware? Well,
let me get one person over here first. Yeah.
Hi, John. I'm Ryan Canuel. I run a company, Petrichor, in the Boston area. And so we actually do a lot of work in augmented reality. And so we're really excited about the full color pass-through on the Quest Pro and all the things that you can do with that. I wanted to ask for that, what's some of the things that you're most excited about for full color pass-through and that technology? And what are some of the things that you really hope to see developers do with that?
So I'm really not the MR booster. Internally at the company, I really am about the immersive virtual reality being the thing that is the unique value for it. MR and AR, the imaginary magical headset that you wear all the time that just annotates your world around you, that's going to be great. It's still not on the horizon. As far as what you would do with the headset on your head, moving around your house or office, augmenting the surfaces that way, I think it is a great way to build today the apps that we hope that we'll have tomorrow on magical AR headsets. But I'm a little skeptical of the value proposition for people, where a lot of the things are, it's like, hey, this is cool that I've got this now in my real world, but is your real world better than the virtual world? To me, always a lot of the pitch was that you can put on the headset and be in a cooler place than you are in real life, that you should be able to do it better. And just seeing real life filtered through the limited quality of the cameras and the rendering process, it's not clear to me that that's that's a pure good there. Now there's going to be some work environments where you want to do that, but even with the higher resolution cameras and the color, it's still there are artifacts, there are things you have to deal with there. It's not nearly as clear as just kind of peeking down out the sides or down below with that. But I am totally prepared to be proven wrong. I'm not dogmatic about this, but I have yet to see the the example of the application that's just like, oh, everybody's going to want to do this. I think people that are excited about the future of AR rather than the present of AR today that are excited about this, and then people just experimenting, and maybe somebody's going to hit on something that's just freaking amazing. I do not rule it out, but I don't know what it is myself.
Sure. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Hi, John. I'm Conrad from Fusion Play. We're sitting in Leipzig, Germany. So it's late in the evening, or very early in the morning already. We're doing VR games since 2016 now, working together with Oculus and now Meta. And for all of our games, we had one big premise that we wanted to make the locomotion issues as low or as simple as possible. That's why we decided to just avoid any of them and go to another approach comparable to Job Simulator. So everything is just around you, and there's no need for locomotion in our games. And our games are purely designed for VR around the way that you do not have to move. But every time we check out different games from app stores, we see that most of the games go different routes, and usually they have whether teleport movement or fluid movement, or what we've seen now mostly is they have both, and then they have different styles of vignettes you can activate and deactivate, and you have a super large options menu where you first have to decide one of 3 different locomotion things. And what we think is that this is not a suitable solution for an easy-to-use approach to, try out different styles that doesn't make you sick and take the best one. Is there any solution for this from a hardware or software perspective that you can imagine for the foreseeable future?
So I'm not aware of any robust hardware solution to like motion sickness there. I mean, we've got people that try the little vibrating things on the headsets or the wristbands, which seem to help some people. There's the things that we know make people sick, like smooth yaw turning versus snap turning. If you do that, like I had that set up, I had that turned on when I was doing my unscripted talk, because I wanted to make sure that I could be aligned towards the camera view while I'm aligned to my desk in real world where I've got my notes going on. And just walking around a little bit with that, I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel good. I'm going to close my eyes when I'm doing large turns, but I wanted that fine granularity, which does point where Horizon should have something less than the 15-degree turn. I should at least have an option of doing like a 5-degree turn or something for that. But I do think that we should have some sense of a global preference, because like you say, many games offer both teleport and free navigation. And I think that would be great to have just a global user preference at least. So if somebody says, I always want free navigation, just any game that supports it, just go ahead and throw me into that mode. That would be a good thing. And then I don't like how every application has its own mitigation with the vignettes, different things that you can do there, different rates that they come in. So, like Horizon has one vignette for moving, and then one vignette for smooth turning. And I do think there is actually a technical sort of objective solution for this that we should do globally, where what actually makes you sick is the sense of something happening on screen that doesn't correspond to your inertial sense. And, with rotation, it's like everything moving around, but a strict linear move, if you're just moving in a linear line, you don't really need a vignette if it's at a constant velocity. It's only the moving around, or if you're if you're turning your head while you're moving and you snake walk, that's a problem. But this factor of things where there's a discrepancy between the inertial frame and your rendering frame, that's an objectively calculatable thing, where if you have a depth map, you can look at anything in your view and go frame to frame, like how did this move and how did the user's actual head move. And I think that we should have the option of doing that at a system level where you would have to submit a depth buffer, which is an extra cost. There's things that I'd like to do where we could make that a subsample depth buffer so it's not as big of a hit. But you have to submit something else to the compositor and then just say, we are going to let the user set a threshold. And then if any game, any experience, any motion, if it's submitting depth buffers, we do a uniform system level comfort mitigation there. And it could be better than anything anybody's doing now because it would be properly depth aware. Because, for instance, if you're in an outdoor area and you've got a skybox all over you and you're just looking around like that, there is no comfort issue no matter how, you move around because there's no local thing moving. It's just a constant velocity. And you would not want to have a vignette come in at all. But as soon as you walk right up and you have a wall next to your head, every little motion that's not head motion is going to have that huge surface right next to you doing very disturbing things. And that entire thing should be vignetted out. It really should be depth aware, not just, oh, you're moving, let's fade something in from the side. So I would love to do that at a system level. But again, no applications are submitting depth buffers right now. We do have an interface for it. It's in there in the OpenXR spec, but it would cost a good chunk of performance right now to resolve the depth buffers. So we would probably have to couple this with some way of getting subsample depth buffers on Resolve to make it really worthwhile. But I think that would be a genuine positive thing for the entire system experience to just say, we handle it. Just set this extra flag when you resolve and when you submit your buffers, and 20 different applications could then behave in the exact same way. We could spend a lot of time on our psychological research of different things about, we could deep mine the data and then all games would automatically benefit from it, rather than just taking the sort of best practice of, oh, do some kind of vignette when you move right now. Yeah.
So I can talk a little bit about that because our game uses special physics locomotion system where you move with your entire arms. And when playtesting, we found that users don't have as much motion sickness as compared to playing games with a joystick. Do you think games that use more of the body, or not only games, but maybe apps as well, if we can find a use for the locomotion, but do you think that moving more body parts has a positive effect on reducing motion sickness, perhaps?
It clearly does help. And I remember people talking about, gorilla tag is one of the obvious things. People are really hustling around with their arms, but when you've got some body motion tied to it, your brain gives you a lot more leeway. But you can't imagine people in an office gorilla walking around as they're moving around in their meetings. So it's not a sufficient solution. But like when I was playing Pop 1, we would talk about how it's like you're walking across an open field. You really just want to be pumping your arms to make you go faster. And that would also be a comfort mitigation of doing anything like that synchronized does work, but it's probably not a universal solution for a lot of things. But when you've got a game that can cater to that, then you're lucky. You've got a great situation. Yeah.
Hi, so my question will be pretty quick because Conrad mostly asked the same. I'm Julian. I'm the developer for Smash Drums on the Quest Store. Mm-hmm. And, I suffer from severe motion sickness for as long as I've known VR. And so Conrad asked the question about technical solution, etc. Another thing I was wondering is, do you have some sort of analytics about how many people are affected, severely affected, as in they can't play most of the experiences where you have artificial locomotion? Do you have these analytics? Are they?
So I don't have them. I don't know exactly what data we've collected because there's certainly a lot that you can learn. So Beat Saber is still the most successful app in VR, and it's kind of the perfect VR app because it doesn't have the motion sickness issues. It doesn't have kind of interaction with physical objects issues. It just plays to all the strengths, and playing to all the strengths, and it winds up being the most successful. There's something to be said there. The games that do have a lot of locomotion, you have games with a little bit of locomotion, like VR Chat, Rec Room, and Horizon, where you kind of, if you move around to a position, you get here. those by far the most minutes are being spent in applications like that, where people do move around a little bit, but the moving's not usually the thing. It's kind of moving to get to a place, and that has the most users, the most minutes that are in environments like that. But no, that's another thing that we probably could use the eye and face tracking to, in addition to sentiment, start getting that sense of like, oh, I'm not feeling good, and getting some real data about that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, because it's a real thing. I mean, I played, like to check out like how App Spacework was working on things. I played a little bit of Green Hell just a couple days ago, and that's a free navigation, moving around thing. And I mean, it probably didn't help that I was carefully looking at the artifacts moving back and forth with App Space Warp, but yeah, I was feeling a little off after I played that for a little while, and that's still a problem for VR. But we have stuff that people can do in the VR world, like Beat Saber and teleport moving around to get to your spot in the social things, and that's including the social, that winds up being the majority of everything. But there's also just that hardcore crowd that's just like, gut it out, you got to get your VR legs, this is the game that we want to play. I wouldn't recommend catering to them as your target, unless you know that you got them dialed in and that's the niche that you're aiming at, and that is a big enough niche to support your product, because they're not the majority. I mean, of all the millions of people that have Quest 2s, the hardcore run and gun people that are doing that in VR, they love what they've got. It's a great product for them, but they aren't the majority. But it is also a mistake to say, comfort above all. That was in the early days of Oculus, we were way over-rotated on that, on no uncomfortable experiences. And it was really because Brendan, the CEO of the company, had severe motion sickness problems, and he couldn't play any of those aggressive games. So it was like all the games have to be playable by the CEO, and in many ways it limited what what the company would do. So it's a mistake to have a hard line there, because it might not be all of the people there, but there's a couple million people that will go do the more aggressive experiences. And if that addressable market is large enough, by all means target them. But if you want to do something that the most people will be able to play and enjoy, then yes, trying to do something that just doesn't involve a lot of the navigation. But it's a question of like, are we, have things like Beat Saber and the fitness applications sort of have that tapped out the space of interesting things to do there? Probably not. The fitness stuff really was a surprise. 5 years ago, we didn't think that nobody really had that on their mind of we're building this for fitness apps, and now that's some of the more profitable, successful applications that are going on. So if you've got a clever idea and it doesn't need the motion, don't let anybody goad you into adding it if it's not crucial to what you're doing.
Thanks.
Hey, just checking if my mic's working.
Yeah. Yes, it is now.
Oh, yeah. You can hear me. Yay! So,
what did you do?
I switched headsets. So that was the solution. It's actually funny. It affected my question. I think I'm going to ask a different question that will make sense in a moment. But just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Jonathan David Martin. I'm a creative director and producer in VR and AR and documentaries and live performance. And my Oculus Launchpad team and I were creating a narrative VR experience called City of Sand. That's an eco-fantasy time-traveling adventure that's inspired by a true story of a town on the Oregon coast that was washed away into the ocean because they made some poor development choices. And yes, cautionary tale that is always seems to be relevant. But my team and I were talking a lot about as we're building out our world and figuring out how to create something that has elements of game but really wants to be something that is broadly interesting to people who like engaging narratives and stories, about where we can expand into multiplayer, and especially with all the conversations around mixed reality and AR and the possibilities there. We're kind of asking this question of, is there something about WebXR that could be useful for us as we develop this further, to have a version of the gameplay that has as a primary player in a headset, but then can also allow other people to be playing maybe on their mobile phones or other devices that just create an easier entry point for people, especially at this point with VR, where you have those people that are really into it, and trying to get other people to kind of get involved and check it out. I've known personally can sometimes be a little bit challenging. And so, in trying to kind of figure out what kind of platform we might want to consider, and probably not right now, but in the 2-3 year, time frame, about, weighing the pros that you get with WebXR in terms of accessibility, but then the trade-offs with performance issues versus a dedicated app. And I don't know if that's, something that you can speak on a little bit, but that's one of the kind of things that we're thinking about on a grand scale.
So I've yet to see like a WebXR app that I think does a really first class job in being comparable to a VR dedicated application, but it's not impossible. I mean, I know what you can do in WebXR. There's no reason why you can't wring all the performance that you could out of even a Unity, let alone a native application, but it's absolutely good enough to do great things. It's just, in general, the people that are mostly behind the WebXR work are on the PC side, and they tend to just be able to throw lots of resources at it, and then it just runs terrible on mobile, where I've yet to see a WebXR app that consistently holds 72 frames per second and doesn't drop a frame. But did you see today the one of the developer breakout sessions with the web developers? They've done a lot of work where they're releasing their own kind of best practices demo. And I started doing some profiling on this just a couple days ago, and it's not perfect yet. It doesn't hold frame rate everywhere. I was trying to actually get some profiles to try to help them out with it, but they've taken some real steps to engage with the open source frameworks communities, get patches taken back, upstream. And the goal is to make something here that will be as good as a native app that's running on WebXR. It's not there yet, but it's not impossible. And having that ability to just go to a URL, but then that's another one of the horrible things. The process for getting a URL to your headset is ridiculous. Yes, people the best practice is to messenger yourself and log in on the web messenger tab instead of having it work internally. Right. So clearly we need to get much better there. But
that seems really necessary, right? For the metaverse to really have that permeability between the physical world and the digital world. Yeah.
But I do always sing the praises of our browser team. I think that they've done an amazing job with it's a small team, and they're supporting an entire web browser and all the WebXR stuff, and they have really been focused on user value. They're after my own heart there in terms of caring about the users and what they're actually doing. So I think that this keep an eye on this project that they're just releasing as far as good baselines for doing all the basic stuff. But eventually you want to be able to see meta avatars in WebXR, where I think if we had a high performance avatar rendering system that behaved basically like this, or like the way the avatars were in Home, and then you were just about, let's do some crazy WebXR rendering thing in here that I don't want to pull all of Unity in. But if you had this ability of just doing the basic stuff that we are here, and then crazy WebXR thing right in the middle of all of us, I think there's a real possibility for doing some neat stuff there. So that's another one of these. Part of me just recoils at the horror of the depth of the web stack. It's just, there's so much stuff going on there. It is 35 million lines of code in Chrome across all of this. And the graphics have to go through a couple extra copies to get there. You don't have as tight of control as you want. But still, on a Quest 2 today, you've got, even going through all of the web stack, anything that somebody could have done as a great Oculus Go game, you could totally do inside WebXR with the performance kind of characteristics that we've got today. So it hasn't had its breakout success yet, but it's not impossible. And that ability to have things marketed and directly accessible just a link away, there's a lot of power there. It's harder in VR because everything's harder in VR versus any other content situation.
That's true.
But I think somebody's can make a breakout there where you get something like, Gorilla Tag could have been done as a WebXR application, perhaps, something that you wind up with doesn't have to be absolutely state of the art, where you couldn't do all the subdivision surfaces and everything that's going on in Horizon here efficiently in JavaScript in a WebXR app realistically. But you could do something that still does have most of the same visual impact of this. And if that distribution of being able to have it immediate and perhaps even more importantly, the instant updating, where when somebody runs a website and they're really paying attention to their users, they can be making multiple changes a day and like every new user is getting it. And even in App Lab or the store, it's still this, well, build a whole new APK and upload it and get it, people having to update to go through that. That can be the superpower of a WebXR development, about really being super embedded with your users and reacting multiple times a day, rather than it's like, oh, we've got a bi-weekly build that gets updated and kind of annoys the user when they have to actually click update for it. So there's some wins to be had there, but it hasn't happened yet.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, John. Thank you for staying on because I know you've had a very long day. My name is Yolanda Barton. I recently finished Oculus Launchpad with quite a few other people here today too. And I am launching an immersive storytelling experience focused on really recreating some of music history's most magical moments so that future generations could experience it. I think what makes my love and story in VR so unique is that I'm not a tech person, that I actually just found that immersive technology provided an amazing solution for a historic neighborhood in Seattle that I was born and raised in. And now I'm using immersive technology to tell the story of Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain and other amazing musicians from my neighborhood. I'm curious how you feel about us non-tech, tech-forward founders who believe in the power of VR, that there's still so many opportunities to unlock this magical tool, and for people who feel like they don't have a place because they're not in tech. Like, what are your thoughts about that, and how can we work together to engage more audiences and uncover their amazing ideas and lived experiences that can help shape the future of VR?
So leaning on audio is a great direction, because we have graphics wise, everybody compares against your latest next gen consoles and high end PC space, and you just can't win if you're fighting that battle. But the audio that you can play out of a Quest is as good as anything you can make anywhere. So high end audio production is also much cheaper than graphics production. You don't need the same sophisticated sets of tools. So something that really leans on the audioscape there is that is a superpower in terms of leverage that you can get versus the super high-end professional developers. So if you've got people that really understand music and audio production and have some basic sense of composition and space and what you want to do in there, and like people that run music shows, they have skills and knowledge about the way people react to lighting, and there's lots of cool stuff that people can learn that are not game developers or VR specialists that have knowledge that can apply really well. And I've yet to see that done as well as I think it can be. I mean, I've seen some like VR shows with some basic lights and things, and sometimes it winds up looking kind of sad and pathetic. It is like, well, this is nowhere near as cool as real life is, while we have the ability of doing things that should be amazingly better than real life. But you do run into the graphics design. I think you're muted right now. You were trying to respond there.
Oh, no, I'm not muted. I was just shaking my head because I agree.
But so in terms of graphics design, though, is hard. There are the benefit of being Unity based for graphics development is there's huge numbers of communities of people there. And while arguably you can do some better graphics in Unreal, the communities are a lot smaller. You can probably find people that you can get to help with Unity projects. It can be problematic for VR, though, because if they're just most people learn on a PC with an order of magnitude more power. It doesn't matter if it drops frames, and not everyone has the right skill sets to do virtual reality game development. But there are people out there. It's certainly better than it was a decade ago. There is this whole small game developer scene where people have the skills necessary to build things. But like I've said a couple times, though, anything entertainment related is hard because you are competing against all of the other ways that people could spend their time. in the entire world. There's $1 trillion of content that is targeted for all sorts of other people. Finding a niche where it's worthwhile for somebody to say, I choose not to spend my time on all this other amazing free stuff in many cases, but I'm going to, look at what you've got there. It's back to that funnel and the fish hooks. You've got to be able to find enough people that are going to be interested in this, grab them quickly, don't let them fall out, out of the edge. And so much of that does come from, even if you don't have the skills, if you really pay attention to your users, watch them, watch their facial expressions. The most great programmers, they start off writing the most awful hacks because they're trying to accomplish something. It's not about having the skills and writing a beautiful architecture. It's about like, this thing that I'm working on, this part's busted. This doesn't do the right thing. I'm going to do whatever ugly thing I need to do to make it right, because that's the important thing. So even if you don't have deep skills on things, really, really watch your users, watch what they're doing and how they react, and find out how to make it better. It's like, that may be learning a new skill. It may be trying to just do some ugly, awful hack to just get rid of the wart that's causing them a problem there. But in the end, you can learn anything. If it turns out that you eventually have to learn how to do modeling or audio production or whatever is your non-skill for your title, it's all out there. The information's available. You can learn it, but that could turn into a whole nother career if you learn it in depth. You have to kind of decide where you draw the line on all of it. But if you should be about your user experience, skills, technologies, tools, all of these are just things to help you provide the user value. Don't over-index on like what you have or don't have. Just kind of pick the things where you've got some comparative advantage for being able to build something that makes users smile.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In a related question, I teach VR at a university, and so I'm working with a lot of new developers, and they're using Unity and Oculus, and just getting them set up in the device to deploy the APKs is so challenging. And then every time there's an update, there's so many errors. And I'm just wondering, like, what is the ideal, like, to balance these new features, which is great, how do we create a good development support? Like, what should that look like? The forums, the documentation, that kind of stuff.
So just staying in Unity is, that is a large chunk of the battle. I mean, if you get anybody that tries to build something native, it's so horrible. I mean, it really does make me sad every time I sit down to go, write an application. I mean, in many ways, for doing something, probably starting in Horizon's a better. So much effort has gone into making it easy for people to build sort of their first VR creation in Horizon, and you can find out early on whether that, if you're getting that huge reward reaction of like, oh my God, I just built this and I can walk around it, I can duck down and I can look over it, this is amazing, then you can go ahead and learn how to use a modeling program, learn how to do something in Unity. Because it's a hard road if you have to go through the whole process of like, I'm going to model something in Blender, and then how do I import that into an application which will, somehow get into VR. That's the type of thing where there should be better paths for like export to WebXR or something that you could make this easy path to it, because our development, it does suck. I mean, it's not good. It's not joyful. There are some development environments where you're just like, oh, it's so much fun to work on this. And that's not mobile VR development. It's better on the PC where you don't have the deployment process. Yes, it is not. I mean, I talk internally just about our APIs, about, as a programmer, sometimes you have what I call a joyful API, where you're just like, I love this function. This function just did what I wanted. It made me happy. This is amazing. And then you have so many things, which is like, oh, I need to provision a handle from here and set up a structure and fill in all the fields and then call this and, set a lambda up over here for this. And then you're just like, oh, this is terrible. And it's rare to see these joyful APIs or, joyful development environments. It's a problem, but like I was saying in my talk, though, this idea of like, well, let's just throw it all away and create something new. That's out of the frying pan and into the fire. Then you have to have people learn brand new things. These are terrible things, but at least they're known terrible things, and there are like mitigations and paths that people have around it. So I hope that it can get better. Like there are paths for WebXR to make some of these things better. It's slow going on this, but the browser works well. And if we can get some of that just works well into some of the development stuff, there's probably some value there. It just hasn't really surfaced yet. But for that first creation, probably working in Horizon is a good idea. Just like Minecraft is sort of this gateway for so many people. It's like, oh, I'm creating something. I'm in a 3D world. This is cool. Maybe I want to learn some skills to be able to do something more involved afterwards.
Thank you.
Nice. All right, I guess I can go with the question.
Okay, yeah.
So, with the Quest Pro announced today that is more work oriented, it's to focus more people into, spending more time in VR and doing what they need to do inside VR for their work or for meetings and whatnot. How far or how close, maybe, do you think we are? Are you okay, John?
Yeah, I was just adjusting my headset. Perfect. That I wound up accidentally clicking the power button. No problem.
Okay. So how far do you think, or maybe how close do you think we are into like being able to do like multitasking in VR, where I can hop into a meeting, have my calendar pop up, or like just doing general multitasking in my Quest Pro without having to like take off my headset and put it back on, go to my computer, go do this, go do that. How close or how far do you think
that's actually getting pretty close, where I am tempted to try it here, but I'm not 100% confident it'll work, but I should be able to just bring up browser while I'm in Horizon here on a Quest Pro. We've been for a couple years building up sort of the infrastructure necessary to let that happen, and we've got enough extra memory on the Quest Pro that we can have multiple apps resident. Now, I want to bring that down to all of the headsets, but so many people bring up the things like, well, if you have Resident Evil up, it's using all of the memory of the Quest. And if you try to bring browser up, something's going to get out of memory killed, and it's going to be a bad user experience. I'm still saying we should make that an experimental option so that people that are in lightweight apps, like, if you're at Beat Saber, you can bring up browser. It should work. But what we really need is a systems level resource support for doing things like paging out GPU textures, so that it would be fine if I was in a Quest 2 and I was here and I wanted to bring up browser. If everybody's textures went down one level of detail while I had browser up, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. That would clear up enough memory for all of that to happen. But that requires really deep integration with the graphics driver and the OS and the GPU interrupt managements on things. But it's possible. And like I was saying, I hope that some of our refugee OS developers they've got the skill sets necessary to do some of these things. They may hate working inside the Android system, but I'm hoping that we can get that kind of cool, awesome new technology to work there. Because, that's what I want. I want this ability to instantly pop it up. I want it to be as fast as your phone. I keep harping on this speed where 30-second launches are not okay. It needs to be as quick and intuitive. It needs to be better than that. Like we used to have this point where several versions ago, at least, inside the any application, when you hit the Oculus button at the time to pop up the Anytime UI, there was a point where that popped up in like 15 milliseconds. It was resident, and it was awesome. And now it takes like a half second, or you click that, it thinks about it, it pops something up, and and all of that. But that I remember thinking that's like, oh, this is just amazing. I click this button and it is there as fast as I can think it, and that's what I want all of these multitasking applications to be. I want you to just be able to have it super responsive, or talking about using the voice controls or whatever. It's like, hey Meta, bring up browser over here. I'm checking. It's like, okay, I don't have that enabled on my system here, but that's what you want to be able to do. And you want it to just pop up and immediately be there. You want it to be a superpower, like the things that VR and AR in the future should be giving us. You want it to feel like you're in a movie. while so many of our features would be, it's like, oh, you can't imagine Mark demoing this in a keynote because he doesn't want to sit there making conversation, twiddling his thumbs while this initializes. You want everything to be movie user interfaces where you're just like, it's there, it's doing your thing as quickly as you want. And I just think that means so much.
I agree. Do you think that maybe Android is in favor of that, or it may be a hindrance, or do you think that Android?
No, I don't think it's holding us back at all. I mean, at the OS level, everything renders to a surface. We project surfaces into VR. That's actually a pretty good path for us in most cases. We have to hack around Android as a harness to get the resolutions and the depth. All the fidelity of some of the things forward interfaces over, but that's not any kind of a big factor for us. It's really just that some Android apps can start up in a half second, and some Android apps take 20 seconds to start up, and that has nothing to do with Android and everything to do with how the developer made the application.
Right. All right, cool. Thank you.
All right. Sounds like we're winding down here. Anybody want to get?
Well, I think we've come to the end of our Q&A today. I definitely want to thank the super passionate developers that joined us today, and definitely a big thank you to John for taking time to answer these questions. So thank you to everyone for joining us at MetaConnect 2022, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Hey, it was good talking with all of you.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Right.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.